Hello and welcome. You are joining the Westford Budget Task Force for our June 12th, subcommittee meeting. We're going to start off in subcommittee and then join with the whole group in about 40 minutes. Dan, what makes the most sense? Should we just open Shanna's document back up and then open whatever the work product is from the other group? And
do we want to approve minutes first? Just get those out of the way.
sure. You don't want to do that with the full meeting?
These ones were just, I think one of them were just budget task force.
Oh, these are just us. Okay.
Like our group, yeah.
Okay. Great. Then let's do that. So there are budgets in the there are minutes in the folder for Monday, June 26th and Wednesday, June 28th. I don't know if anyone has any comments or people want to take a quick look at them if they haven't yet.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see them, so I'm happy to abstain if we approve them.
Okay. I had a chance to look at them quickly. Did other folks have a chance to put eyes on them?
Yeah, I read them too.
Yep.
Okay,
look
great.
Look
Okay.
good.
How about a motion to approve?
Still moved.
In a second. Okay, and Dan,
Yes.
Shanna,
Yep.
Chris? Yes. And I'm an I, and Erica, do you want to abstain?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, great. All set. Great. Well, which should we start with, Dan?
We want to start with Shanna's stuff?
Sure.
All right. I'll put that on the screen.
So there's still a lot of color coding happening, so I can keep track of what's missing. But and we talked a little bit about this last week, but I think only really Dan and Erica were here. So I started this similar to what the Hingham report looked like, but tried to alter it a teeny bit for sense of not entirely plagiarizing all of their work. So Tom, I think you and I at some point, as we get a little further, we'll want to sit down together and just decide, like, do we like those medium high numbers? I tweaked them just a little bit again for some variance. And then we'll just need to fill out this chart with what we want to put in here for recommendations. And so I've added a little bit since we went through this last week, spent some more time on it over the weekend. And so Dan, at the first sections,
I should mention, I've been working on the Google Doc.
Oh, cool.
So this may be a little bit.
I sent this one to Dan on Monday morning, I think, because I wasn't sure when he wanted to send it to the group, and I knew at least I wasn't going to update it between Monday and now.
Okay, I can speak to mine then. There is some updates, but.
So town facilities, I just finished really that section for the most part. Our primary lease rental income is coming from the Road and Bush, Frost, Old Now buildings. There's really not, from what I can gather from a variety of folks within the community, a lot of space really available to rent outside of what Dr. Chu is already doing with the schools. The meeting rooms at Fletcher Library are no charges. So there's really not a lot of opportunity for revenue. One of the areas that I dug into a little bit more as we scroll down there, Dan, is the rent for the Road and Bush building. It appears to be on the lower side based on the information that I could pull out. And so the possible recommendation here might be to revisit, what might be a market rent rate for a property of that size. And then take into consideration, obviously, that we're renting it to a nonprofit, and just determining whether or not what we're charging them for rent is a fair and market value given the situation, or whether or not we might want to adjust it when their rent is renegotiated in fiscal year 25. I reached out to Jenny because as Dr. Chu had kind of mentioned, and so she sent me some information earlier this week that I didn't have a chance to put in here, so I can add just a little bit more about the rental income for school property so far. and where that money is currently going. So I've just got to update that little section. But in general, that's really the gist of this area. Is the primary opportunity is to increase use of school rentals however we can, and potentially looking at the TRCCI lease to see if there's an opportunity to generate more revenue there. So that was really it for this section. The recommendations I felt like we probably needed to talk about as a group. So some of them I added something in, and then some of the, and I by highlighting them all in blue so that we can go back and discuss as a team, what our final recommendation might be for these areas. I don't know if we'll do that in the subcommittee or do that in the broader committee, but I figured that was something we needed to determine all together, not just me individually. I've been trying to get some more information on town-owned real estate. This is obviously a small ticket item anyway, but I was able to track down with Dan's help some of the hierarchical information, like how many properties we have. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of information about what might be viable properties, but I am waiting for a potential response from any of these three gentlemen about any information that I could add in here. And then it just talks about if we were to sell property, what does that impact immediate revenue plus something going into the tax roll. So it's really not that much here. Composting program, I don't know if you got into or you have anything to add there, Tom, or on these two.
Yeah, so the main so there's a little bit of text in the Google Doc, but the main thrust of composting is the big opportunity is really in diversion of waste. So right now we pay two main components in waste collection. One is the collection itself, and the other is the tipping fee, the amount per ton we pay to have the trash incinerated. And so I'm working with the Recycling Commission to get an estimate of how much of a Westford's typical curbside trash could be diverted through composting. So I found some numbers online, which Ken Teal at the Recycling Commission tells me are too high. So he's going to come up with a number another way. But roughly, I think it'll be, say, 10 to 20% if everyone in Westford adopted a composting program of their own. That would reduce the tipping fees by 10 to 20%. The tipping fees are about $800,000. So, there's a little bit of money potential there, but the way to access it would really be to educate everybody to adopt something like this, which I think the Recycling Commission is working on anyway. So we can decide how much we want to put there as a real opportunity, but it's not a policy decision exactly. It's an education campaign to have people take that step, which we are doing, and we should see some benefit from. I have fee increases too. So I asked Jeff Morissette to provide a list of current fees. I know we did this in the Economic Development Committee some time ago. We actually had a whole list of fees, and we looked at some other towns and what their fee structures were with the goal, in that case, of remaining competitive. So I think that's what we'll have in this section, basically, is a list of all the current fees and then some sort of benchmark against sort of how it looks elsewhere. And if we see a big difference, we could recommend, okay, we should adjust this to be more like this, and we can multiply the times the number of that permit per year and come up with an estimate. I think it'll be pretty small numbers though, because my recollection from the work that the Economic Development Committee did was that we were basically in line with comparable communities on fees.
Oh, and here comes one of my loaded topics, marijuana retail shop. So I've got, for those of you who looked at it already, there's quite a lot of information in here. So I've got the description of what it is. I've been on all of the Cannabis Commission websites, all the good stuff. I pulled some of the revenue dollars from just the most local, like neighboring towns, and what they projected for this coming fiscal year. So I had just pulled, you can see here, Tingsboro, Lowell, Dracut, predominantly. I think, did I pull Littleton? I think I could, I don't think Littleton had theirs as a line item actually, separate. So I don't think I was able to grab that. I don't know if maybe it might be nice to put some sort of graphic or bar graph. I don't know if somebody kind of at the end might fancy this up a little bit, but I just put a note there, maybe putting some sort of a chart there with the revenue might make it a little prettier. I think the potential revenue is medium to high, depending on how many establishments. I put that in there. I think that this is a process to implement. Anything I have green, I need like Dan and Kristen to recheck to make sure I'm putting the right steps in there to change something. In terms of the community impact, we kind of talked about maybe diving a little bit deeper than we necessarily need to here. So I actually just got off the phone right before this meeting with the Tingsboro police chief and talked with him about what they've seen in Tingsboro since they've opened their dispensary there. And he was telling me that they have one of the top 5 busiest dispensaries in all of Massachusetts, and there's literally been 0 impact from the community. And so there's no increased crime rates. He says they have no data points that they could offer about increased youth usage of marijuana since they opened the dispensary. He said that it's one of the most highly regulated places in all of Tingsboro. And so I won't write all this in here, but I'll put some sort of overview. And basically, he said that if you're looking at any substance, alcohol has a far larger impact in their community than marijuana does. I got a similar message from the Littleton police chief as well, who said that they have seen 0 impact to their community since they opened a dispensary there also. And Chief Chamber is here, and Westford also told me that just since it was legalized overall, we haven't seen any increased crime rates related to marijuana in town, despite obviously not having a dispensary in general. So I think we've got those kind of areas to talk about. On the last meeting, Erica had kind of talked about how the youth was kind of a big driver in some of the arguments back in 2018. So I went digging around for some of the youth risk behavior surveys. And so I was able to find some information from the DESI website about the results of the youth risk behavior. And so I put in a little chart here. I think probably this would be better as a bar graph, but again, we can pretty it all up later, but just what was the usage between high school and middle school in the years right before marijuana was legalized, and then in the years right after. And so I just put in some data there that basically shows a negligible change in youth risk or youth behavior in regards to marijuana since it's been legalized. They didn't seem to publish fully the 2021 data yet that I could find. So I was only able to find on like the CDC website, I think right in the next box, they had just one statistic about high school current usage last 30 days was the only thing that I could find for 2021, and that came off the CDC website. And that is kind of where I was at in the marijuana dispensaries. So I think I've covered a lot of the bases there.
Tom,
Please.
if I could jump in
Yep,
for
go
a
ahead,
second.
Chris.
There was an interruption in our participation in some of the risk surveys, and we've moved to use some additional information as well too, which I can look at. You're still going to see the same information. It still is. There hasn't been a significant increase, but that's why some of that information wasn't reported as well too.
Yeah, I mean, if we have actual Westford data there, it might be nice to just add in what Westford's usage has been during that time and how it compares across the state. I mean, obviously we don't have a dispensary here, right? So it's not apples to apples, but I wasn't sure if I'd be able to find district by district results. So I just went for the Massachusetts state information here.
We've participated in some of them. We actually used to also participate in the Emerson Hospital would do one.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why we found that we were doing the same surveys with multiple groups, and so we decided to not survey the students. But we can look at that within our wellness department. We have information that could help with the connection to when it was legalized in the state as well too.
Yeah, I mean, the overall gist of all of the research I've done, and I've spent quite a bit of time on this one section, is impact has been minimal since it's been legalized and in the communities in which they have dispensaries. So I think that that's part of the point. Whether or not we pursue it or not, is still up to the select board and the town, obviously, to vote on. But a lot of the arguments that were made when it first became legalized don't seem to have panned out now that it's a few years in practice. And it looks like their revenue amounts are, anywhere from, 650 to $1 million in revenues. And so it's a decent amount of money. It's not, multi-million dollars necessarily, but there's a decent amount there. And at this point, a lot of the neighboring towns are really getting Westford revenue, right? So that's that. I don't know if
Yeah.
you got into the.
It's pretty interesting. So that's going to spark a real discussion. So
Well,
can look forward to
I'll
that.
be ready to speak about it because I got way far in the weeds on that one.
So pay as you throw has been around for a while. So I guess the changes here are our new waste provider. Basically, we had two bidders to take on our waste contract. Both of them required us to go to an automated waste collection system, which means basically a tote, like we have for recycling now. And typically the way that other towns have set this up is that residents get to fill up the one tote that they have, but if they need any more, they have to buy overflow bags. And the overflow bags, that's pay as you throw. And people may have variants of that, but that's basically the system that is pay as you throw. We've done some studies in Westford in the past. I think that this is coming to Westford, largely driven by the fact that people who have pay as you throw systems generate less waste. It may make sense, it's an economic incentive, but our neighbors that have pay as you throw generate something like 20-25% less waste per household than we do. So that's a decision that the select board could make as a fee, or may decide that needs to come to town meeting. The economic benefits, so typically it's viewed as more of an offset of rising waste disposal fees than a real source of revenue. When we've done a study before, I think we said, based on a whole bunch of assumptions, that you might see between $150,000 and $200,000 of offset for the increased waste costs if we move to a pay-as-you-throw. I'm going to try to get an updated number. The last time that we did the analysis or the calculation that came up with that number was in 2021. So I'm going to see if I can get an update from Eric on that. But I guess the takeaway is that there's a lot of sort of ecological sustainability drivers that are really getting behind this. The providers themselves are more or less insisting that people move to a system like this. So there's a lot of tailwinds here on moving towards pay as you throw. And the economic impact is meaningful, but not huge. So if we redo the numbers and it still is between $150,000 and $200,000 potential offset, that's real money, but it'll only help us offset the increasing costs. It's not, gonna fund something new, really.
For short-term rentals, so I've been digging into this. The only real opportunity, we don't allow short-term rentals other than in the Summer Village district, the rental overlay district. And so I did dig in and find out that we currently don't charge any short-term rental fee or room occupancy fee to Summer Village. Those are the revenue from Summer Village is only on the tax revenue on the property. So there could be an opportunity to impose a short-term rental fee or room occupancy fee potentially here. But the revenue impact is probably low and it's somewhat unknown. We don't have any data of the frequency or duration or the volume of the rentals. I did go on their website and it does have like 19 properties listed for rental as of June 25th. So there's actually quite a bit of rental availability, but what would that translate into dollars is hard to tell. But we can decide when we make our recommendation if it's worth having somebody dig into it further or not. But it seems low impact. So what's next, Dan? What's next on my list? Oh, it goes to you.
Yeah, so split tax rate. I'm not sure we really want to cover this unless we feel that the public sort of just wants the explanation. Some people might think of this. So we basically did a split tax rate study a couple of years ago. It was one of the first things I did when I was elected to the select board. So what this is it's the ability to charge a different rate on residential taxpayers versus commercial, industrial, I can't remember what the P stands for, but basically non-residential taxpayers. People do this often to mitigate the increasing tax burden on residents over time. So some towns have a, like a 50-50 split. They have a lot of non-residential taxpayers. And so they might incrementally have them pay a higher rate, have residential people pay a lower rate. The split tax rate doesn't affect the levy, though. It doesn't affect the amount of money you can collect. It only affects the allocation of who's paying it. So if you're looking at it from a budget task force point of view of raising additional revenue, moving to a split tax rate doesn't do that at all. It just affects the allocation between the two. When the committee did make a recommendation a couple of years ago, we recommended that we not move to a split tax rate. That was mostly because Westford is 86% residential taxpayer. So to make a 1% difference for the residential taxpayer, you'd have to increase on the small businesses something like 7%. And so in order to make any kind of difference, you'd have to make such an outsized increase on businesses that we became concerned that would make Westford not competitive for business. And so we recommended that we continue with the same, basically level, same tax rate that we have now.
I think it's good to include, Tom, because this is something I asked about when you and I first started. Just you and I were talking about splitting this up. Is I think that that statistic is right there, what gives you the information that you need to know, right? From a town perspective, just a citizen perspective, it's like, wow, there's all those businesses out there in 110, and look at Red Hat, and look at, and the concept that changing, especially if at some point we're looking at, do we need to do a Proposition 2.5 override? It's like, it doesn't help anybody really to shift that burden just because the percentage of commercial properties is so small, and that the shift would have to be so sizable that it would make it almost impossible, not for the red hats, but maybe for, the smaller businesses to continue to maintain their spaces. I think it's good to include it, even if we already know what the potential answer is there, because you already studied it.
I agree that would be really helpful to include all the information, because I think there is a significant misunderstanding about that. And so the way you just explained it, Tom, was really clear. And so for us to have that, that narrative in here would be helpful for people to understand that, because I think people do look at it and immediately just assume, well, why isn't there a commercial rate? And they should be paying higher, not realizing that it's still part of the levy, not realizing what that offset would have to be in order to make that work.
And I think that it might be helpful too, just for the narrative, to maybe include a few examples, maybe not from all of the comparable communities, but from a few of them. Because if you look at somebody like, other towns that are similar to ours, but their commercial property is so much higher. So just to say that, like, a split tax rate might work in X town, but that is because they have 60% residential, but 40%. And to just give that little bit of that narrative as to, if I just pull up a list and I'm like, oh, look, these people around us all have split tax rates. Well, that's because Lowell has, I'm just using Lowell as an example, I don't know if they really do, 50% of their tax roll is commercial. So it makes sense to do it there, but that's why it wouldn't make sense. So I don't know that giving like 1,000 examples, but maybe pinpointing a few in our communities, our comparable communities, where it makes sense for them to do it, and why it makes sense for them to do it, and why it doesn't make sense for us to do it, might be helpful. And you may already have some of that in the study.
We do. So yeah, I'll add that. So almost everything I said is now in the online version of the doc, but I'll add a little table about other communities and what they've done.
Is if we were, as we do look to, look at additional resources and say, we talk about the levy, if we are talking about an override at some point, is there ever room for the override or pieces of the override to impact commercial industry more so than residential without changing the base rate? I don't know if that makes any sense what I'm asking.
Like if you override for $1 million, could you put 400,000 on residents and 600,000 on commercial? Is that kind of what you're?
If you determine that there's a need and you do an override, is there ever a way that just that portion of the new money be allocated differently to the commercial industry versus residential? I don't know.
So only by doing a split tax rate, that's the only mechanism we have to break that up.
Right. So you could do it, basically, to have the effect you're talking about, you'd have to do both at the same time.
Gotcha.
So you basically incrementally lower the residential rate so that after the override, the increase is
burden.
smaller.
Okay.
If you wanted to do that.
Okay. Meal tax, we're already at the max, so there's nothing here to report. So I just put a little history and what the information was. Real estate transfer fees. I don't know if you had a chance to dig into that one yet, Tom.
I really haven't done anything there except what we talked about before. What I'll do is I'll put towns that have done it or considered it and what they've decided to do, and we can come up with a monetary kind of estimate of what the impact would be.
Perfect. Room occupancy fee, we are already at the maximum there, so there's no further actions there. No,
Cell tower rentals, I'll pull together some stuff, but the gist of this is that the way a new cell tower shows up is the provider, like Verizon, says, in order to maintain coverage or in order to move to 5G, we need one in roughly this area. And then they notify the people who could be potential sites in that area to see who's interested in that. So there's not really a good way to know how much revenue opportunity there might be, but I can come up with what I can do is say, typically a lease for this looks like this. Over the past 5 years, they've added this many cell towers in Westford, this many are, I don't even know, Dan, do we have any cell towers now on municipal property?
I think that just a water tower, they collect rental income for that.
Okay, so it's going to be a very small impact, but I'll put a little narrative in here.
Great. So school activity fees. So I was spend some time on this one a little bit more on Sunday digging into this. And Chris, I don't know if you have some suggestions for me eventually, but I very easily, thank you to the Westford Public Schools, can find the Westford Public School fees with a very simple Google search. So I just made a list of what our current fees are that we've adopted.
So you have the 22, 23, those are staying the same for 23, 24 as well too.
Okay. So I can update that. So I thought that it would be a great exercise to try to use the dark communities to compare them all. I'm finding that to be a little bit challenging. I spent a lot of time Googling all kinds of different things and looking at activity, athletic fee, or just all the different websites and the school websites and student handbooks and parent handbooks, because I can tell you with 100% certainty that not all of the other school districts are as transparent about their fees. So I've been really struggling with this. I spent a long time in Arlington. I couldn't find any reference. Like they reference having fees, but I couldn't find what they actually were. I was able to get some of them through some of these districts. And then I had been working on this document for like 6 hours and then I got annoyed and I stopped there and decided to table the rest of them to the next time. So I want to keep continuing that. I don't know, Dr. Chu, if you have any suggestions of easier ways to do it besides just continuing to Google and try to dig and search.
Well, no, I appreciate that you have this laid out like this and that you've got the information that you have. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and also see if our internal people can connect with their counterparts, right? Like ask the athletic director to reach out because he'll have access. I know he already has access to the different athletic fees that some of them, at least within the DCL, but like he might have to do a little bit of work to find the others, but we can kind of.
I was like, do I just email all the superintendents? Because this is taking me like a lot of these, it's just not very transparent. And then some of them that have regional schools. So like the middle schools are in different areas than the regional schools. For whatever reason, Arlington doesn't have theirs anywhere. So
That's
any
that's
help?
That's what we find when we're just trying to find the salary comps and things like that. Sometimes some districts are very quick and easy to share that information, and sometimes it takes a
I
little.
thought it would be quick and easy because Westford's was like right there on a page, and I was like, "This is great," and then I was like, "No, this is not so great."
We'll take it. Let me take that over from here.
Okay, so if
We'll
you can
see
help me with that, that would be awesome.
the rest of it.
And then I think the next is the bus fees. So I started doing this similarly on bus fees. It didn't, again, I struggled to find some that were more transparent than others.
And it's
and
true,
again,
what you have there, some don't have them, right? So we'll see that as well too.
yeah, I mean, and it's hard to tell if I just can't find it or they just don't have it. And so I got through a few of the same towns, and then again, I was doing them simultaneous, the bus fees, and so I was in the same town district, the same districts. And so after I got through Carlisle, I kind of gave up. So I'll keep digging on that and then circle back maybe if I can't find those ones. Should be easier to find, one would think, but some of them I try to click into like the registration form to like register my kid for the bus to see if the fees are like in the schedule.
Most of them
So
will all come out of the business offices, so that's where we'll connect our business offices as well. But if you do get a chance to look at the business pages in some of those districts, that might be available there.
might be available. Okay. So that's where I'm working on that. So those two sections were the primary things I didn't have done yet. We talked quickly about the solar panel fields last week. Tom said that there's a study that's happening right now. We have an assessment being conducted. So we're kind of going to table that one for a week or two just to see what information comes out of that. So I'll circle back to that one kind of down the road. The naming bylaw fees are currently the select board is the authority to name public buildings. I think their revenue is probably low, maybe medium, depending on like the available opportunities to name the naming convention. I think that it's still probably not something we want to do. For the community impact, I put in, the tendency in town is for our buildings to currently have some historic naming convention, right? Norman E. Day School or Rita Miller schools, and that if we had a naming bylaw type fee where somebody could come in and contribute money to a capital project, that they would name the rights, and instead we might have the, Farnsworth Elementary School, and it wouldn't have nearly as much meaning to everybody in the town as Day School and Rita Miller does. So we can make a decision as a team whether we think there's any value there, but there's just the history and the overall information for that. And then Tom, these two are yours. And I'll just, before you get into the economic development, Tom, after you and I talked and broke this list down, I had connected with Jeff Morissette in the planning department, and we had quite a good conversation about specifically under the economic development, that MBTA family zoning requirement. And so we had, as I was evolving in that conversation, it felt to me like we should pull that out of the overall economic development category because it has a more immediate impact, and that we obviously have some action that has to be taken as a town in the next 6 to 9 months. But also if we approve something relatively quickly, there could be some immediate builds that could start impacting as early as like 26, fiscal year 26. So there was a lot more immediacy to a revenue source from this potential versus just like the hierarchical economic development. So I thought potentially we should pull it out as its own item, especially because it's going to be something people are going to be hearing about as we go into the March town meeting, because we're going to need to vote on the zoning for that. So I don't know if you have a different opinion or you want to make it a subtopic for your economic development piece, but I thought we should really call that one out as its own, or at least more in-depthly on its own. So I did take the initiative to just put some of the background history in here on that, and what it is and what it does and what the purpose is.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense to break it out because you're right, it's immediate and it may have a meaningful impact, and we might be able to come up with some sort of estimate range.
Yeah, so Jeff told me that they just started a subcommittee or working group for this that had their first meeting either like this week or next week. And so their timeline's a little different than ours because they're looking to present this in March versus October at special town meeting. But he thought that in the next like 2 months or so, as we got closer to October, they may have some potential revenue compilations or projections that we could utilize for this report.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And on the general economic development, some of the ARPA funds were awarded to the Economic Development Committee to do a kind of survey project with some consultants to look at what is the total potential for economic development in Westford, given that a lot of the land that's zoned for that is already occupied. There's stuff already on the land. And so that'll be part of what the consultants bring to us is here's sort of the gap analysis for where Westford is now, where it could be, and here are the steps that we can take to get there. So we'll have more information and a plan by the time we're presenting this. I think you're right that the MBTA might have a bigger impact much sooner. I think the economic development, if you're talking about repurposing any land or you're talking about changing anything, that's going to take a longer time. And we'll have less control over that in terms of impact.
And it sounds like there's potentially some people in general like interested. There are a lot of developers interested in what happens with this multifamily zoning requirement that are kind of ready to move on projects as they find the right properties in the right towns. And so it seems like this is something that would move quickly to becoming a revenue source if we did it correctly and we did it the right timing and et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, Jeff probably told you, but there's a market rising to buy properties that would be in the zone now on spec. People are buying are paying a premium already with the assumption that this is going to happen to kind of get footprint to build. So
and some haste and whoever early bird catches the worm kind of situation here with this too.
Yep.
The towns that adopt this earlier are going to have higher productivity and revenue streams. So I think we want to probably talk more about that. And I think that's basically it. Something else after that, right? Oh, a good old conversation, whether we want to include this here or somewhere else, but some information about the 2.5 override.
Yeah, we can figure out stylistically where it fits, but definitely we'll have to have a backgrounder on what it is and how it works and what the mechanics are and what have comparable towns done. And Dan and his group have done a great job of pulling together a ton of information on other communities and what they've done overrides for and what the success rates have been. So there'll be plenty of info on that.
So we can continue to work on this document as we get into next week, and then Tom, we can talk about when it makes sense to resend it to Dan before next week's meetings, and then it'll have the combined information then.
Yeah, do you feel, I mean, you've done a huge amount of work on this, so thank you. Do you feel like we'll be basically at the point where we've got the draft that we're going to have pending things that are taking a longer time to come together? Like everything we can do, do you think we will have been able to do it by, say, the end of this month?
I mean, I think so. I think most of my items are like I've written, other than putting in recommendations, I think I have descriptions and histories for pretty much most of my stuff is done, I think, at least in draft form, less maybe like Dan and Kristen looking at some of the process to implement and making sure that we're talking about the right bylaws and, things that have to happen that are beyond my knowledge base. And then, Dr. Chu's information, he can help me pull on those school statistics, which will be helpful, I think, overall to have them anyway, right? From a school perspective. So it has a double benefit to getting it all pulled together. And so I think most of it on my side is as done as it can be, barring adding a few details here and there. And then making sure, obviously, like the writing, we have to at some point make sure all our writing is consistent with the whole document. So it doesn't look like you wrote some, I wrote some, Dan wrote some, but I'm assuming that someone will proofread all of it together at the end and try to make the look and feel similar.
Okay, good. Why don't we roll with that? We'll try to have everything that we can do done by the end of the month, and what that will leave will be maybe like the specific estimate of impact that's going to come out of the MBTA working group that Jeff's put together. So we'll have a couple of placeholders, but I think we'll be largely done. Welcome, everybody. Just to wrap up, Dan, do you want to give a quick?
Could I just ask a
yeah.
question on the, we were talking about having some version of, sorry, and I don't know how to raise my hand. So I have a power outage right now. That's why I dropped off for a few minutes. And
Okay.
I ran out my iPhone and it's plugged in to try to make sure it has enough juice for the meeting. But I don't know how to raise my hand. So that's why I'm blurring out.
No problem.
But I was wondering, do we want to have some version that we think is palatable for public consumption a few days before the public meeting of these, just to say the types of revenues that we're considering? And that way people can say, oh, you didn't consider X, or, oh, have you considered, this aspect of Y that is on your list? So, I wonder if maybe having something up there a few days before the meeting is possible.
Well, I think Dan had a chart, right, in the slide deck that at least gives that overview chart of what the topics are, even if it doesn't have the in-depth text, right?
That's correct. Yeah, and we'll have this detail with us too. We don't have to share it publicly yet, but we do have a lot of backup information.
Yeah, it's a good point, Erica. So maybe we could do is, if we feel like we're ready, we could give ranges of economic impact, for example. Like we may not want to share the whole text of the document, but if we've got all the new revenue categories, if we're in a position where we have sort of bucketed them in terms of impact size, we could probably share that. But I think the point of this meeting, point of the public meeting, and we'll get to that on our agenda, will be, to share maybe some basic information to help orient the group, but then really to go through the table of contents of what we're doing and explain why we've chosen to do what we're doing and get their input on new things that we may want to explore. So welcome here together. I guess we're doing a couple things we want to do. We want to have talk about preparing for the forum. We want to talk about our strategy for going out to interview both the internal Westford departments and other towns. Before we do that, though, do we want to do a round robin recap on the different sort of work threads in the two teams, just to give everyone a general update? Does that make sense? Since I suggested it, maybe I'll go first. Shannon and I are doing, really Shannon's doing like 80%, I'm doing 20% of the new revenue sources. And I would say are maybe 2/3 done of detailing out sort of what the different revenue sources are, what the different impact sizes might be. We're going to try to be done with everything we can do by the end of this month. We think that's realistic. And the things that might be left are, there's some things that are a little bit longer term where there is work in process already. So in some cases, we can just estimate the impact right now because we either have a cost number or it's an easy calculation. In some cases, there's work groups elsewhere in the town that are trying to put together answers to the question. So, for example, we were just talking about the new MBTA zoning bylaw change that will allow for multifamily, sort of enhanced multifamily build out for residents, housing units in the MBTA corridor. There's a working group meeting on that now that's going to try to come up with an estimate of the impact that could have. They're not going to have that this month. It's going to take more work than that. So we'll have everything except we'll have some placeholders left for things that are to be developed. And we can share, is there an easy way to do it? Dan, is there an easy way for us to share? I guess what you've done is you've put in the meeting minutes, the most current version that you had as of Monday. So what we'll do is we'll PDF the current working document as it stands now, maybe in the next couple of days, and update that. And so you can take a look, everyone can take a look and send comments if you have them. Any questions about the new revenue source quick before we ask Dan? I guess, Dan, are you the right person to talk about the budget challenge piece of our work group?
Sure, I can let everybody know where we're at currently. So we just went through year end, which is great. So we're preparing to send out the budgets a week from Wednesday. So we have them all formatted. We have to wait for our last warrant to be processed on the 14th, and then we can update the information and get that out to department heads with directions on how to proceed with filling out those budgets. We're gonna start, they're due 4 weeks after, so it gives us time to review with the department heads before the report's due to give us a better base on how our entire financial picture is looking prior to October 1st. So that's our first goal. So I'm actually out next week, so Jeremy is going to be spearheading most of that process in the meantime. As far as other expenses go, we're still waiting to hear back on the solid waste recycling contract. Hopefully we hear back soon. The energy costs, we're going to include a write-up in the budget message to departments and let them know how much of an increase each year they should plan for based on the data we have. So we give them the answers to the tests there. Let's see, other things we have, salaries, collective bargaining agreements. Jeremy and I are working on forecasting out all the way through FY29 with certain assumptions. So it's a lot of work to get these analysis put together, but I'd say we're about halfway through those, and we should be wrapping up in 2 weeks at the latest with those. Health insurance trust, we're still waiting on analysis back from our advisor at Hub to see what their projections are looking like. New growth we discussed before, we have projections in the model for that, and then different things such as the bus contract, special education fleet leases, the feasibility study incomes, and special ed tuitions are all I believe being worked on by the schools to come up with some sort of estimate range for what those could potentially be for us to share. I think that covers all of them.
Yeah, let me pick on, not pick on, let me ask Chris Chu, how close are you to providing some sort of dollar range estimate of impact for some of the things that you've got? Special ed tuitions we know is a major one. We know that the competitive pay is a big one.
So I think we're very close to being able to share what we're projecting for the salaries. The ones that I think is going to take longer is the bus transportation, and we're still waiting to hear back from the state as to what they're finally going to end up deciding in terms of the support that they are looking to provide in terms of special education. So there's still a little bit of fluidity there, but we have our FY25. We have, based on our FY24 numbers, we'll be able to be, creating our FY25 expectations. For special education, we can't go beyond that. But in terms of what Dan was just sharing too, in terms of the salary pieces, we can be looking at that once we know what our target is to kind of correct course the salaries, and then from there looking what that would be like moving forward in the future. That would be something we'd be able to do as well too.
Okay. I guess with a very near-term focus of this of the upcoming event on the 24th, do you think that in the next week, say, we'll be able to get those sort of dollar cost estimate ranges for what the impacts might be for, I guess, really for all the school and the...
Yeah, we can share, we're already prepared to share all of the information that we shared with our joint group in executive session. I feel like that's information that now most of that is information that we'd be able to share. And so we can fill those dollar amounts in for what the challenges are for FY25 specifically.
Okay. And Chris, could you send the presentation that you used for the joint boards to me? I just want to take a look at it and see if there's anything we want to pull out before we, add that in some form to the document we're creating.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I think that's where we are with our working group.
Tom?
Yep.
Yeah,
Erica?
I just wanted to point out for the tool that all of this data is going to go into in order to crunch out what our likely gaps are, budget gaps. There's also a use for having the most likely. So we're talking about the range a lot, the max and min likely range, what we think is in the realm of possibility, but there's also room for having the most likely number identified. for both the new revenues and for the challenges.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Erica. Good point.
Yeah, I'm putting that request out there is why I'm bringing it up.
Okay, super. Okay, I don't know who's the spokesman for the other subcommittee group, but would love to get an update on where you folks are. Spokesperson.
So I can start and the others can fill in the gaps. So I think we reported last time we are at our benchmark communities for both DART Plus for schools and about 21 municipalities for the town side. VBU has done some amazing work related to visually graphic explanations of how we compare with other municipalities and schools budgets. So we'll be looking forward to sharing that with the group in the near future. Christina and I have been working through downloading all the US Census data associated with our benchmark communities to make sure that we have that information related to population, income, median household income, and the like. There's a lot of data there. And then Christina and I have been scouring the municipal fiscal year 24 budgets in each municipality to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. As we've said before, municipalities budget in different ways. You know, facilities could be its own department in one town, but then combined in another town. Health insurance could be portioned out versus town versus school. So we are pretty close to getting ready to share all of that data with the larger group. And then we've also developed a list of questions that we want to ask not only the Westford departments, but also our comparable community departments. Just about, we're seeing a nuance here. Can you explain this to us? Why are we so high in this area? Are we providing a separate service that another municipality might not to be? So we really look forward to working with this group as a whole this afternoon, if we have time, to talk about the approach of outreach to departments and other comparable municipalities. And then we finished our discussion today by really talking about what types of efficiencies could we be looking at? Could it be cutting FTEs? Could it be regionalization? Could it be hours of operation? Could it be other types of things? So we're really just touching the surface of that right now, because we felt that it was very important to get the data cleaned up first before we went into that next step. So did I miss anything, or does anybody else want to add anything to that explanation?
I think that's pretty good. The school data has been on a bit of a different track, I think, than the town data, because I think we're trying to build our trust in the DESI reports, since schools, like you said, similar to municipalities, can categorize and bucket their expenses somewhat differently. Like our Chromebooks wouldn't show up because they're in free cash, but another district may use operating funds. So we're just trying to, I think, get to that point with the school data, but we compared to the town data, but we also have the visualization ready to go for the school data. So that's what's happening sort of in now and next, is using that statistical clustering to look for what districts we could learn from that is spending different than ours in different function codes. I think that's it.
Great. Well, a couple questions, I guess. One is, are you guys keeping your work product in Dan's OneDrive? I was trying to look through and try to find a couple of things, and it wasn't.
So we were not, because Christina and I were working through a spreadsheet together, and then Jenny and Bibu and Valerie were working through another spreadsheet. So they were really working documents. We did talk about towards the end of our meeting this afternoon about what we'll be ready to upload into the general OneDrive. But with us being a subcommittee and then subcommittees within that, we just wanted to make sure that the data was most current. So we'll be prepared to do that in a few days.
Okay. Is your working target, or do you have a working target for when you think this first round of, sort of data collection? I think the efficiency thing may take a little bit longer, because that sounds like a lot more detailed sort of understanding and review. But do you feel like you've got a deadline set for the first cut of the benchmark data?
I think we pretty much have the data. It's now combing through it. Christina, do you want to?
Yeah, I think Kristen and I just need to touch base, and then we can probably move that spreadsheet to OneDrive. And I think it's probably good enough for this at this stage. We may add to it, but.
Okay. And it is my sort of quasi assumption, right, that the efficiency part I'm just thinking about this upcoming public session and just general expectation setting. It seems like it wouldn't be surprising at all if it took another month or two even to go through and explore the efficiencies and feel like we really understand them.
Yeah.
I think we'll be hesitant to throw something out there if we don't feel like it's a realistic, thoughtful option.
Yeah, I think we're sort of looking at the data so much that if the efficiencies come out of that, it will still take a little bit of time. And then if there's efficiencies that sort of wouldn't come out of this data, the other ideas to outsource from other areas, that will just take a little bit longer to research.
Okay. Maybe transitioning a little bit into what we want to have ready for the 24th. We talked a little bit on our side. I think we're going to want to have a first cut of sort of what the budget challenge topics are. And if we have something that gives us a dollar range, I think if we feel pretty confident in those numbers and they're not that likely to change, I think beginning to educate the public about sort of the size and scope of the different budget challenges is probably pretty helpful. On the new revenue opportunity side, we're going to list basically all the things that we are looking into as new revenue opportunities. And Shannon and I will see if we feel like we're ready to give some sort of estimate range on what the potential impact might be on some or all. So for instance, we're looking at the impact of composting and diverting compost out of the waste stream and the tonnage savings that would be, we could
You could do like the restaurant rating, like $1 sign, $2 signs, $3 signs.
Yeah, right now it's a high, medium, low, but maybe I like that better because people are pretty familiar with it. But in any case, we're definitely going to list the list so the public will have a chance to say, why aren't you investigating this as an opportunity? Why aren't you, I don't know what this one means. Can you explain it? And we probably won't give the full text in the meeting, but we'll try to give a couple salient points maybe, or just a sort of an impact range if we've got it in terms of what the impact might be. On the benchmark data side, what's your team thinking about what you'll have ready and what you'd want to share in that meeting on the 24th?
So I think we are going about the approach that we were looking more for public feedback from the 24th than anything else than sharing the data. I think Dan shared the draft PowerPoint with everybody, and it has we can definitely say who our benchmark communities are and that, but I don't know if we were really preparing to share any additional data with the public, except for answering questions. I don't know if anybody in our group has any different thoughts on that.
No, I would agree that I feel like especially this first one, I would want to focus more on listening and sort of any brainstorming or organic discussions that happen based on the attendees, but minimizing, and maybe it's having slides ready to go if the questions come up, but sort of minimizing the amount of time that our group is doing the talking.
I see Chris's hand.
I was just going to say in doing that, I think what would be helpful would be letting people know the types of data that you're looking at, because you're looking at so much data that if we just tell them what the benchmark communities are, they're still going to want to know, well, okay, but what are you looking at? And so that without giving them the actual data, because I think you're right, that would be too much, but giving them an idea, like with our new growth and our new revenue, we want to let them know the things that we're looking at so that they don't then start suggesting that we look at things that we're already looking at.
So I think it makes a lot of sense to basically describe the benchmarking we're doing, describe the information that we're gathering. If the questions that have been submitted so far through the webpage is an example of the kinds of attendees that we're likely to have and the kinds of questions they're likely to ask, I think there will be a lot of people who either are Westford educators or are closely affiliated with them. And I think if you haven't had a chance to look at the comments, maybe half the comments or more are related to the schools and school spending and perception of budget cuts. At some point, we're going to need to engage with that and just share what the data is, not editorialize, but just say, here's how much we spend on these things. Here's what the trend has been over time. Here's how other communities are making choices at that same high level. I guess the question is, do we want to have that ready and backup? Because I think it's quite likely that there'll be a march to the mic and lots of questions related to those things. And we'll either have to decide that we're going to engage with it then and say, okay, good, thoughtful thing, here is the data. Or whether we're just going to kind of let that. I think there's going to be kind of a question like, why aren't we ready to talk about that? Also, I don't know how others feel. I feel like I at least want to have it back up. Here's the general high level, allocation by department. Here's what it's been over time. Here's how it looks in 5 other communities that are part of our benchmark set, just to orient people to what's actually happened in the facts. I don't know where people feel like this audience will be. Christina?
Tom?
I'm sorry, Erica, I'll come to you right after Christina.
Okay.
I'm sort of on the fence like you, Tom. I think it's probably not a bad idea to have something as backup. I hesitate to get too into the weeds with some of that in this forum. So I don't know where that balance lies.
Yeah, I think ideally people would have the information first, have access to it first, and it wouldn't be like they're raising something and we're coming back with another counterpoint right away. So yeah, it could be we can just position this as, hey, look, this is early. We are obviously collecting the data. We want to talk about the data we are collecting. Yes, that's a great point. We're going to be looking at these trends with other communities. Yes, that's a great point. We're going to look at how this is trending over time. Thank you for making that suggestion. I've written it down. We could really stay entirely at that level, and then give people data to absorb and reflect on before we have the meeting where we're getting into the details. Erica, why don't I go to you next? Then I see you, Vibhu, and I see you, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to, I express similar to what you and Christina just suggested, is that I think there is a balance, because the public is going to want to react to what we're saying and not just provide inputs from whole cloth. They want to be able to provide input to where we are, is my guess, right? So I think that we should view it not to minimize our presentation, but really to find the appropriate balance for our presentation. So we're not giving them, again, a fire hose, but we're giving them enough to react to so that they can say, oh, this is potentially coming down the pipe. I have a feeling about it. And ideally, we give it to them a few days ahead of time on our website so that they can come prepared with questions or thoughts. But again, I think my feeling is that we should view this as a balance of data where we give them something to chew on, and not just expect their inputs coming from nothing or minimal. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Erica. Vibhu?
There means, Tom, when I looked into data, there can be a lot of questions. And the reason for that is all the data is not normalized. The way we spend versus other communities is not normalized. If we start showing this information in any kind of visual to public and they start asking more questions, are we willing to go into details of each of these? That's one thing. Second, it can be, from my perspective, can be little offensive if I am showing that fire department is spending too much without going and talking to a department head and understanding how our services are different from others. That's the reason, at least for this meeting, I like what Chris mentioned. We show this is our data architecture this is how we are going to work on this stuff. And sooner, once we are ready with the feedback from department heads, we share the details and then take the feedback. That will be my recommendation.
Okay, good. Thank you. It's a good recommendation. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to, again, say that I feel like the purpose of our committee is honestly our final report, right? And our final recommendations. And so when we have this meeting on the 24th and when we have other public sessions, that's for us to gather feedback and information from people about things that they want us to be thinking about and considering. It's not a time when we should be answering questions as to what the school budget has been for the last 10 years. if they want to talk about the school budget process, then I think they should come to a school committee meeting and we have that conversation then, and we can answer questions there. But it's not the budget task force's responsibility to be answering those types of questions. So I think we can hear their concerns, but I don't know if it's our place to be answering some of those questions as a committee, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm happy to answer questions. If people want to talk to me about it, I'm sure Valerie would be as well too. But I just don't think it's the budget task force's responsibility. And so the public meetings should be about us receiving information, telling them what we're looking at, and our job is to then develop our recommendations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think what I'm hearing is trending more towards teeing this up, preparing for the questions that people are likely to ask. But if people ask, for instance, why aren't you in this meeting sharing detailed comparisons with other communities because we believe this to be true, we would say we absolutely will do that. That's absolutely in the table of contents. But today we're here to basically get your reaction to what we're planning to go find. Shanna?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Sorry, I think my video is frozen, but I think Val has a good point. I think we want to be listening a little bit more than talking. And I think that idea from Dr. Chio to just have a high level overview of like what we're looking at, I think is the right play. And I think having information in case perhaps nobody comes to the mic and tries to ask a lot of questions, we can go into more details and have some of that information readily available to fill, dead air. But I think allowing people to potentially give their input would be great. And then I was also just going to ask, do we have the feedback from the online form? Is that in the OneDrive somewhere? Because I didn't, or was it attached to an email and I missed it? Because I don't think that I had a chance to review that information. What's coming in from the public form.
Maybe Valerie, you can share. I know I saw it, but I don't remember where. I don't remember how it got to me.
Sorry, it dumps into a spreadsheet, and I gave a couple people access to viewing it, but I was hesitant and sent about sharing the raw data because there's some misinformation in there. There's, some of the, if you've been following town budgeting, there's some of the sort of regular talking points. And so I don't think it's necessarily a public document yet. But I messaged Tom, you saw it because I messaged you directly to try to flush this out and say, how can we keep sharing this with the committee? Because I do think there are good themes in there of, it's like a good touch point to see what our residents are thinking, right? And there's some sort of common questions, like you're saying, what happened with the 2017 override? How much are we allocating to these departments? And so when we talk about, I know we've mentioned a little bit in this committee about like sort of a frequently asked questions, right? And I think that this input from the Google form might help form some of that. I don't think we're ready to sort of fact share and like lay a lot of that to bed on July 24th. So that's another reason why I think that the conversation that was just happening is helpful, because I just don't think we're there yet to really lay that all out there for once and for all and say, no, this is the new set of reality that we need to all move forward from.
I think it would be helpful potentially for our committee to be able to review some of that, just so we have some idea of potentially what to expect going into the 24th, right? And of what people, just from a preparation perspective, I'd love personally to be able to kind of have an idea what some questions might be coming up to the mic or what things we might need to be prepared to speak about. So I don't know the best way of doing that, but.
Let's absolutely address that. But before we do, Amy, I want to be sure we hear from you.
No, I wanted to go back to the expectation of what this is. And so I was just kind of trying to look at the flyer, we're talking about whether or not we're going to get a lot of questions. And so when I look at the flyer and it says open forum, I just want to make sure that we're clear, right, of what the purpose of it is, what the goal of this is. So I'm looking at the flyer. I don't know that says that. I don't know if we can kind of go back and just say
open to feedback. It's a draft of mine.
No,
Happy to
yeah.
add It's based on what this committee thinks.
But I wouldn't have even considered that until, you know, you're bringing up, Tom, you're bringing up people maybe coming and wanting answers, right? So I guess what's a way of communicating that this forum is just that. It's a information gathering, it's a feedback. I'm not
Yeah, I
sure
wonder-
if that's necessary, but I think to lay out those expectations in some capacity might be helpful to people to know that they're not going to be there and they're going to be upset or frustrated, right?
I think that's a great point. I think we kind of have to post the materials a couple days ahead of time, but I think directing people maybe from the flyer or adding some language on the flyer, like, you know, help us, you know, we're looking for input on our work plan more than we're here to present any kind of result. I think setting that expectation would be really helpful, because I think well, why don't we transition to sharing the online feed group? I also would feel that it's probably a good idea if we share the feedback with everyone in this group. I agree that it would be problematic. Once you see it, you'll understand why if you haven't guessed. I think sharing it publicly would be kind of problematic. But I think having people, you know, see what questions are being asked is a good idea. Kristen, I don't know if you had an opinion on that. I'm trying to remember whether you were reacting to it's probably not a good idea to make it public, or if you had a position on sharing it within this committee.
I think it's helpful to share within this committee. I do not think it's helpful to share within the public realm. I think obviously we will put an appendix of public feedback in the overall final document. But I think the feedback that we're receiving through this public comment is necessary for all of our board members to see and to frame the work moving forward.
Isn't this an open meeting, and isn't it public then if you share it?
It's still in draft form, so it's not a final document. So we can hold it as draft through just our committee because we're still working through it. It's not a final document yet.
But this is an open meeting. If we, do you know what I mean? So
I have a comment on that. I think in an open meeting, even public officials are allowed to receive comments from the public that go to everybody. And if that's what these are, since it's one way and we're not discussing it in anywhere other than in a public forum, I think it's just public input, and people on committees get that all the time, you know, where they have an email address and people send it to the entire board, and that's okay.
sure, I guess my point was it's a recorded meeting and people will see this and they will get the same information, and that's my.
Yeah, I think the way that this will be shared is through an email separate from this meeting. We're not going to pull it up now. I think that's I agree with you, Amy.
Right,
But
I'm sorry, I misunderstood, and I didn't. Okay, all right.
Right, and I think we can comment to the tone of it and what we're hearing. It's not unusual for public officials to receive all kinds of input from all kinds of people, and it's always, well, there's not a requirement in most cases to share in public what people might share as an individual, you know, suggestion to me, for example. Okay, so I'm liking this approach, and I'm liking the expectation setting that we're really getting input on the work plan and what we're planning to deliver and investigate. We're not sharing data right now. I think that's a totally appropriate thing. Just so people who, if you have not been close to this process for a while, there is sort of a narrative that I think the lived experience of a lot of people connected with the schools is that the school budget has been under a lot of constraints. That's absolutely real. That's real in Westford and real elsewhere. I think that there is a feeling that is in part because of the fiscal choices that the town has made, and maybe other communities are doing it differently. There's a general thread that somehow the override that was passed some time ago to augment the teacher salaries, that didn't all land, you know, in the place that it was intended. So those are things I would just expect to come up because they've come up in school committee forums, they've come up in all kinds of discussion areas. And I think our position, it sounds like from this group, is rather than try to react to that with data now, we would say, we understand the question, that is part of our study. You will be seeing those kinds of comparisons, exactly what you're talking about in the final work product. Basically accept it as input rather than try to react to it at this point.
And I do think also, Tom, that we may be more positioned to pinpoint some of the data that we want to share more specifically in the second public forum too, right? So we're going to be planning one in August or September, right? A second one before we get to a final presentation. So I think that can be part of the narrative too. Like this one's just about the plan. This is what we've done so far. Do we need to pivot at all? Do we need to add anything at all? And then we'll take some of these topics that you're asking about, and then there'll be a further presentation down the road that can include some of the high level points that came up during this meeting.
Yeah, and I know, like Vibhu's point too, that it's really problematic if we present data and then we realize that we didn't normalize it properly and we present something different later. That always creates this sort of doubt if you're changing and updating your numbers and they keep shifting. So better to be confident before we put it out there. Okay, I feel like we're in pretty good shape with what we're doing for this presentation. I think the changes to the draft slides are maybe only a little bit of additional verbiage around just thinking about the part Shannon and I are working on, the potential revenue sources. We may want to add a little bit there. Any other comments on the presentation materials? They're pretty high level, but I think that's what we've landed on here, is that's exactly where we want to be right now.
I can't tell if you're going to pivot, but I'd love to get some feedback on the flyer, and I could share my screen if that would be helpful.
And while you're doing that, Valerie, just wanted to be clear of who's actually leading the presentation on the 24th. Tom, I know you might not be there in person. Christina's certainly not going to be there in person. So just wanted to get some clarification on who's leading that.
Well, usually if I'm in other circumstances, I've asked someone else to chair who's physically in the room if I'm joining remotely, just because I think it's not as effective a meeting if the person who's chairing it is remote, if most of the other people are there in person. So I will know by the end of this week whether or not I will be in Japan during that time or not. So if I am, I think I'll ask and see if someone else who's sure that they will be there would be willing to sort of lead the discussion. If I'm there, I'd be happy to sort of tee it up. Does that get you as far as you want to go, Kristen? How about a commitment that we will make sure it's clear who's chairing, and then we can figure out whether on individual slides it makes more sense to have the individual committee leads who are responsible for that actually talk through those slides. That probably makes the most sense, but why don't we confirm that? So we'll confirm who's chairing and we'll confirm who's presenting each slide, because it might be effective to have different voices teeing up the different topic areas. We can confirm that by the end of the week. Okay, we've about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we talk about the other piece we wanted to cover today, which is the interview process.
So Valerie just wanted to confirm her flyer.
Oh, I'm
before it
sorry.
went out.
Let's
So
do
we
the
have to
flyer
send that
first.
to we should send that out this afternoon or tomorrow morning if we can.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. So let's, Valerie, let's look at the flyer.
Probably going to be a tight fit, I think, but I was trying to make it look like an event that you want to go to, and not just something that you get in the mail and recycle right away. Not that this is going in the mail, but anyway, I was just trying to be attention grabbing, eye catching, and sort of dynamic, but then there's a balance of sort of busy. So recent updates, we're adding the seal and sort of the town at the top to give it that sort of official link, but open to feedback on all of it.
Do we want to add in somewhere, I don't know if we need to make it smaller at the bottom, what we were just talking about this being a presentation of the plan or of our working plan, and just reemphasize that part somewhere, maybe in the description of the task force down there. I don't know the right place, but maybe that piece of it we want to emphasize, like a sentence about the purpose of the meeting.
Yep, I think, or I could even sort of make the budget task force forum smaller.
Smaller.
Or rename it, or, I think, I heard that feedback so far today, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing I had. Otherwise, I think it looks nice. Good job.
Well, to Amy's point, is it clear that we're seeking feedback here? Right? And so like, is this a presentation or is this a listening forum? And so I feel like the word forum helps with that, but there isn't anything on there other than share your thoughts with the task force using the form. So
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep, Christina?
Maybe if we just say budget task force listening forum or something like that. And then, like you said, Valerie, if you make that a little bit smaller, maybe another sentence under there, like you originally had something along the lines of, we want to hear from you, maybe just another sentence down there, re-emphasizing that we want to hear from you on the direction we're headed, or something like that.
Okay, this is great.
Yeah, so I think, I think those are all good suggestions, something along the lines of, to review and get your input on our work plan for the next 3 months or something. So we kind of get that out there. Any other general input for Valerie? Val, do you have what you need?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Okay, great. So Chris, we're not going to have a whole lot of time here, but Kristen, I think, are you the best person prepared to talk about kind of what our interview approach looks like?
I can definitely start the conversation, but I think I wanted to hear from some others. So obviously we have our benchmark communities for school and town, and we also have all of our Westford town departments. The benchmarking and efficiency group has a certain set of questions to ask the Westford town departments, as well as the communities that we're benchmarking against. And I'm sure the other group has questions to ask our departments and the other municipalities as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we were using kind of a unified approach. So we weren't, having 6 people go to one department head for all the answers or questions, or 6 people going to a town administrator in another municipality. So I know that some of the other group has already started contacting the departments, which is great. You guys are, well on your way with working. We have not really reached out to anyone with questions yet. So just wanted to discuss that approach to see how that makes the best sense to make sure that we're getting the information we need without pestering, I guess you can say, for the lack of a better word.
So from our group, I think if we look at the budget challenge areas, I'm not sure we need survey for that. And I think Shannon and I have done, Shannon in particular has done some surveying already. Maybe we can share with you what we've already done, not right now, but separately. Maybe what Shannon and I can do is take a look at all of the new revenue topics and see where we think it would be valuable to get input. In some cases, we'd want to talk to a community that's already done that particular revenue new generation item or considered it. So why don't we pull together the communities from our side, our subcommittee side. Let's pull together the committees that we think we would want to reach out to and get that to you, Kristen. There may be some overlap, but I think it won't be a ton.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we needed the information to generate the data versus you guys needed to look at the data to generate your questions. So I think that the work, it was kind of flip-flopped on our side. I definitely did pestering for sure. But I think that was because in order to write my stuff, I needed to gather the data, whereas you guys needed to gather the data to generate your questions. So I definitely think Tom and I can see what else we have left, and especially from other communities. From a school perspective, Dr. Chu is going to help find some information through like on school activity fees and bus fees for me through some of the school channels. So certainly if there's anything that the other group needs from other school districts and the DART districts, then we might want to have you connect with Dr. Chu ASAP before he has his team start reaching out about activity fees and stuff like that. So if there's overlap in the DART districts from the school perspective. I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Chu, but I kind of did. But, he was gracious enough to help me with some of the stuff I needed.
The good thing is, like, I know, like, Jenny and Valerie and I communicate as to different things that we're looking at too. So I feel like on that side, we are pretty set.
Okay, so why don't we commit by the end of the week? Shannon, I will send you a list of the people that we think would be valuable to do outreach to, or maybe also people we've already outreached to. And then we can run that past you, Kristen, to make sure we're gathering information efficiently.
Sounds good.
Okay, in terms of future meetings, do we like this? Dan, you may have already done this. Do we decide already what next week's meeting plan was going to be?
We haven't discussed it yet. On the draft schedule, we have Wednesday, but I won't be here next week. So it kind of depends if you want breakout groups or you're gonna meet jointly.
I think we'll be coming up on the public presentation soon enough that we at least want to have part of the meeting be all hands. Valerie?
We didn't really cover this before we joined the larger group, but I'm wondering if our subcommittee for benchmarking, if everyone might be interested in meeting like Monday or Tuesday as well as an additional meeting. I just feel like we're still coming out of the data. Guess we could just do a doodle poll or something offline.
Yeah, I can put an email out for that. I think we should definitely meet next Wednesday at 12:30 as a full group, if nothing less, to make sure we're all on the same page for Monday evening.
Okay, well, why don't we, this time seems to work. So why don't we hold the same time? And I guess, do people want to start in individual subcommittees do you want to do the same thing we did this time, or do we want to just go ahead and meet all together off the bat?
I think we should start all together to make sure we're not missing anything for the forum, is my opinion.
I would agree. We'll
Okay.
have that deadline, so makes more sense to feel like we're really ready as a full group.
Okay, let's do that then. So we'll kick off same time next week, but as the full group. And after we approve minutes and do other business, we'll focus on the presentation and in the upcoming session. Anything else?
Are we
people wanna
gonna-
make sure- Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm, are we going to keep that till 2:00 and then, or just the 1 hour for the whole group? Or do we think we might break in our subcommittee after just to tackle any final pieces? Just want to make sure I block off my work calendar for 12:30 to 2 or 12:30 to 1:30.
I guess I was thinking we'd leave it 12:30 to 2. If we don't
Okay.
need the time, maybe we'll adjourn
Perfect.
early, but
I will.
okay. Okay, anything else we want to make sure we cover today? Very productive. Anything else we want to make sure we cover today before we break? Okay, well, I'm excited about the work of this committee. I'm learning a lot. And I know people have put in a ton of hard work, so very grateful for that. Thanks. And have a great week. We'll see you next week.